Daniel Westbrook sat alone in the corner of the cafe, sipping his third espresso and quietly questioning every decision that had brought him here. At 43, he had everything society said should make a man happy: a tech empire worth hundreds of millions, a penthouse with a city view, and invitations to high-profile gatherings where every handshake came with an agenda. Yet what he lacked was something money couldn't buy: a genuine human bond. That was why his sister Emma had insisted on arranging this blind date despite his protests. "She's different, Danny," Emma had promised. "She's real. Just meet her, please." And so he sat there now, dressed in his sharpest suit, his version of armor, ready to endure another polite hour with a woman who'd likely memorized his bank balance before his birthday. The cafe door chimed, and a young woman stepped in, scanning the room with uncertainty. She looked to be in her early 30s, dressed in clothes that had seen better years: a weathered tan jacket over a plain beige top, faded jeans, and canvas shoes whose frayed laces told their own story. Her light brown hair was tied in a practical ponytail, and the threadbare backpack slung over her shoulder looked as though it had lived several lives. When she spotted him, she smiled, a bright, genuine smile that reached her eyes, and walked straight to his table. "Daniel?" she asked. Her tone warm despite the nervous flicker in her gaze. "I'm Lily, Emma's friend from the community center." Daniel rose automatically, manners kicking in before thought. This was his date. Emma had set him up with someone who looked like she might not afford a cup here. "Please sit," he said, his tone sharper than he meant. Lily settled into her chair, placing her backpack gently by her feet. Her eyes moved around the upscale cafe, not with discomfort but quiet admiration, as though she appreciated beauty in any form. "This place is lovely," she said. "I've passed by it so many times but never had a reason to come in." "Thank you for suggesting it." "I didn't," Daniel said, a chill in his voice he instantly regretted. "Emma did." "Can I get you something?" "Just tea, please." "Any kind is fine." Daniel ordered her tea and another espresso for himself, using the exchange with the waiter to study her. Up close, she was more striking than he'd first thought, her features soft yet expressive, her face carrying stories instead of polish. But what intrigued him most was her quiet confidence. She didn't shrink or try to impress him, she was simply herself. "Emma tells me you run a technology company," Lily said once the waiter left. "That must be exciting." "It's demanding," Daniel replied, folding his arms. "Stressful, all-consuming. And you?" "What do you do?" "I'm the volunteer coordinator at the Riverside Community Center," she said. "That's where I met your sister. I organize programs for families. After-school care, job training, food assistance, that sort of thing." "That's not a career," Daniel said flatly. "That's charity work," Daniel said before he could stop himself. Lily's smile didn't fade, but a quiet strength appeared in her eyes. "It's my career," she said evenly. "I have a degree in social work and 8 years of experience helping people rebuild their lives. Choosing a non-profit over a paycheck doesn't make it less meaningful." Daniel felt the sting of her words, which only deepened his irritation. "I didn't mean to belittle what you do. I'm sure it's fulfilling, just not very lucrative." Lily finished softly, her tone calm, not defensive. "You're right. I barely make enough to pay rent. My clothes are secondhand and I take the bus everywhere. By your standards, I probably look like I have nothing." She reached into her worn backpack and pulled out a small parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Setting it gently on the table, she said, "Emma mentioned your birthday was last week. I made you something. I know we just met, but I was raised to never show up empty-handed." Daniel stared at the humble gift, a tightness forming in his chest. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said, pushing it slightly toward him. "I wanted to. You can open it now or later. Whatever you prefer." He hesitated, then unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small leather journal, clearly handmade, his initials embossed on the cover in simple, elegant lettering. The leather was soft, weathered, likely repurposed, but the craftsmanship was exquisite. "I make journals in my spare time," Lily explained. "It's not much, but Emma mentioned you used to write poetry when you were younger. I thought you might like a place to start again." Daniel brushed his thumb over his initials, the texture grounding him. He couldn't remember the last time someone had given him something so personal. His recent birthday had been marked by expensive gifts from colleagues and an impersonal donation in his name. Things that cost money, but required no thought, no care. But this woman who had so little, had spent her time and effort creating something meant just for him. "When did you make this?" he asked, his voice lower than before. "Last week," Lily said, after Emma told me about our date. "I work on journals most evenings after the center closes. It helps me unwind." She smiled shyly. "It's simple, not fancy or expensive, but I've always believed something made with heart is worth more than something bought without meaning." Daniel looked up at her. Really looked. Past the worn jacket and scuffed shoes, he saw warmth in her eyes, quiet strength in her posture, and a richness that had nothing to do with wealth. She'd walked into this cafe appearing to have nothing, and suddenly, Daniel realized she had everything he'd lost somewhere along the climb to the top. "It's beautiful," he said softly, his voice carrying a note he hadn't heard in himself for years. "No one's given me something like this I can't even remember." "Thank you." Lily's smile brightened. "You're welcome. So tell me, when did you stop writing poetry?" The question hit him off guard. "How did you know I stopped?" "Because Emma said used to, past tense," Lily replied. "And because you have that look, the one people wear when they've traded pieces of themselves that made them happy for the ones that make them successful." Something fragile inside Daniel cracked. "You don't hold back, do you?" "Life's too short for that," she said, her hands wrapping around her teacup as her voice softened. "I learned that the hard way." She paused, eyes distant. 3 years ago I was working in corporate consulting. Great salary, nice apartment, all the shiny things that say you've made it. But I was miserable. Then my mom got sick. I spent 6 months watching her die while my coworkers worried about missed bonuses and delayed promotions. It changed everything. Daniel's voice lowered. "I'm sorry about your mother." "Thank you." Lily's expression was steady but tender. "Losing her was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and the best thing that happened for me. It made me realize I was wasting my life chasing comfort instead of purpose. So I quit, sold most of my things, took a job at the community center for a fraction of the pay. Best decision I've ever made." Daniel studied her, this woman who spoke of pain and peace with equal ease. "Don't you ever miss the security?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I don't miss the emptiness, the feeling of going through days that didn't mean anything. Coming home to a beautiful apartment that was just a place to crash before working myself numb again." Then she looked straight into his eyes. "You have that same look, Daniel. That hollow kind of success, like you've reached the top and still can't breathe." No one had ever said it out loud before. "What makes you think you know anything about me?" he asked, more defensive than he intended. "Because I used to be you," Lily said simply. "Different job, same story. And because your sister loves you enough to keep setting you up with real people instead of the climbers and opportunists you usually meet." Her tone wasn't judgmental. It was kind. "Emma talks about you often," she continued, "about how smart and driven you are, but also how lonely. She worries about you." Daniel felt the familiar walls inside him begin to shift, pieces of his practiced detachment slipping loose. "I don't need anyone's pity." "Good," Lily said with a faint smile, "because I'm not offering pity, I'm offering honesty, which, let's be real, is much harder to take." She leaned forward slightly, her voice low and clear. "Here's what I see. A successful man who's forgotten how to be happy. Someone who has everything society values but nothing his heart does. Someone who walked into this cafe expecting another empty, predictable date, and instead met someone who actually sees through the armor." "That's quite an assessment for a 10-minute conversation," Daniel said, forcing a half smile. "Am I wrong?" Daniel wanted to say yes. He wanted to dismiss her words as naive, but he couldn't. But as Daniel sat there, fingers tracing the worn leather of the handmade journal, his initials pressed carefully into material, Lily had likely rescued and restored herself. He couldn't deny the truth in her words. "No," he said softly. "You're not wrong." They talked for 3 hours, long past closing time. The staff, recognizing Daniel as the regular who always tipped generously, let them stay undisturbed. Lily spoke about her work at the community center, about the families she helped, the children she mentored, and the quiet satisfaction that came from making a difference. Daniel found himself opening up in ways he never had before, about the emptiness behind his success, the relationships that had fallen apart because love had been replaced by admiration for his wealth, the gnawing loneliness that lingered even in rooms full of people who wanted something from him. "It's not too late," Lily said as the evening shadows stretched across their table. "You can still change. Start writing again. Spend time with your sister. Use what you have to actually help people, not just accumulate more. Find something that gives your life meaning beyond profits or recognition. Daniel arched an eyebrow. Is that what you're doing? Finding meaning in poverty. Lily laughed, a sound full of warmth, not offense. I'm not poor. I have enough. I have community, purpose, and relationships that matter. By the measures that count, I'm rich. She hesitated for a moment, then added, and just so you know, I agreed to this date not because I needed anything from you. Emma said you needed someone real. Someone who wouldn't flatter or fake interest. Someone who'd be honest. Daniel blinked. So this was a mercy date? Lily smiled gently. No, this was an honest one. Her tone softened. And honestly, Daniel, I think you're fascinating. Beneath all that armor, you're thoughtful and sharp and capable of feeling deeply. You're just terrified to let anyone see it. She reached across the table and rested her hand lightly on his. I came here looking like I had nothing on purpose, to see how you'd react. Whether you'd look past appearances or not. You failed that test at first? She smiled. But you're passing it now. Daniel looked down at her hand. At the bitten nails, the calloused fingers, the evidence of a life lived through work and care. These were the same hands that had crafted a gift for him, a stranger simply because it felt right. I'm not used to people who aren't impressed by money, he admitted, quietly. Then you're surrounded by the wrong people, Lily said, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. Money's just a tool. It can build or destroy depending on how it's used. But it'll never replace compassion, character, or connection. Those things you can't buy. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, something unguarded flickering in his eyes. Will you have dinner with me? He asked suddenly. Not here, I mean, yes, here if you'd like, but I'd really like to see you again. Learn more about your work. Maybe even volunteer at the center, if you'll have me. Lily smiled. A real, luminous smile that reached her eyes. It was the most genuine expression he'd seen directed at him in years. I'd like that, she said. But fair warning. If you come to the center, you'll actually have to work. No special treatment just because you're rich. You'll be cleaning floors, Lily said with a mischievous smile, sorting donations, and listening to people's stories just like everyone else. I think I can handle that, Daniel replied. We'll see, she teased, eyes glinting. Rich guys usually last a day before the reality of service work sends them running back to their comfort zones. Daniel laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. Is that a challenge? Absolutely. He walked her to the bus stop despite her protests that it wasn't necessary. Under the warm glow of the streetlight, Daniel clutched the handmade journal in his hands and felt something inside him shift. Quietly, but profoundly. Thank you, he said at last. For this, for the honesty, for seeing past the money to whatever else might be there. There's a lot there, Daniel, Lily said softly. You just have to decide if you're brave enough to let people see it. Her bus pulled up. She slipped her worn backpack over her shoulder. I'll text you about volunteering. Fair warning, it starts at 6 in the morning. I'll be there, Daniel promised, and he was. The next morning. The morning after that. And every Saturday for the next 3 months. He sorted donated clothes beside Lily, served meals to families who had little, tutored kids whose parents worked double shifts. His colleagues whispered that he'd lost his mind. His ex-girlfriend mocked him for slumming. But Emma, his sister, just smiled knowingly. Lily never asked him for money or favors. Only for time. For sincerity. She challenged him, made him laugh, and gently called him out when he drifted into arrogance. Slowly, she helped him uncover the man he'd buried beneath years of ambition and isolation. 6 months after their first meeting, Daniel proposed, in the same cafe where it had all begun. He offered her a ring he'd crafted himself in a jewelry-making class Lily had convinced him to take. It wasn't flawless, but it was his work, made with his hands, his effort, his heart. Yes, Lily whispered through tears. But on one condition, we keep volunteering together. We keep remembering what matters. We keep each other real. Always, Daniel said. She'd walked into that cafe looking like she had nothing and he'd nearly overlooked her. But what he'd found was everything. Authenticity, kindness, purpose, and the rare courage to be real in a world that worshipped appearances. She'd seen through his wealth to his loneliness, through his success to his emptiness, and given him something money could never buy. a way back to meaning. Sometimes, the greatest gifts come wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Sometimes the richest souls are the ones with the least in their accounts and the most in their hearts. And sometimes when we stop measuring worth in currency and start measuring it in character, we realize that everything we've been chasing was running away from us all along. Daniel had thought he saw everything he ever wanted in a woman who seemed to have nothing. What he truly saw was everything he'd lost in himself, reflected back through her quiet strength. And in finding her, he'd found his way home, to the man he was always meant to be. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment below about what true wealth means to you, because your stories inspire us all.